Welcome everyone. This is my first community webinar for the year, so it's great to see some friendly and familiar names, and also great to see some new names I don't yet recognise. So my name is Meredith Henson. I am the Senior Partner Success Manager here at Totara Learning, and I am joined by the stupendous Matt Lineker, Customer Success Manager. Matt is going to be sitting there on chat. He's going to be making sure that you guys are getting the links and information you need. He'll also be feeding me questions as we go, and I would encourage you to post questions in the Q&A section of Zoom. The reason for that is that every question has a separate entry, and so as we answer them, we can tick them off so we can make sure that we cover everything that we can today. Now, while I am talking and doing my intro and doing all the boring admin side of things, I have a very quick poll to launch, and it's just it's anonymous. It's just working out which of you listeners today have already who are already using multi-tenancy of some kind today. So today's session is going to be a few slides, mainly to prompt me on various points, but also as we are recording today's session, there'll be nice kind of placeholder or thumbnails for anyone who's watching the video after the session's done today. And we'll be posting this recording up on the Totara community, and you can watch it via the YouTubes later on. As I say, please do post questions in the Q&A. Anything that we don't get through today, we will also be posting directly and we'll respond to in the forums. So there is follow-up in the community. But any questions, comments, howdies, hellos, oh, sorry, there's a bit of weird background noise, in the chat as well. So please do communicate in the chat. Now today's session, as I say, is being recorded and will be available shortly, probably in the next day or two via the community. Alrighty, so that is the poll and complete, and let's have a look. And I will share the results since they are anonymous. So I have never pressed that button before, but it looks like I imagine that you're displaying on screen. If you're using any form of multi-tenancy, 20% of you said yes, 71% says no, and 9% is it's complicated, which is we're not really sure what way it's going, or it could be that you've got a little bit of MT happening. So thank you very much for sharing that. Now, that's the placeholder slide to remind myself to introduce everyone and to launch that poll. So, Matt, is there anything I need to know before I get stuck in?
Sorry, sorry, no, I was just stopping sharing those poll results. No, there's nothing else they need to know, but yeah, really looking forward to learning about multi-tenancy. I know it's a big feature, so great to learn more about it.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. So it is a big feature, and that is a good prompt to say that I'm going to go, there's quite a lot of content to go through today. Matt's always telling me off to going into too much detail. So I'm going to got all the slides to prompt, but just a note that the kind of questions that I'm anticipating today are probably very specific scenarios. So do post them in the Q&A, and if I don't get to them, we'll go through them and answer them after the fact. More high level kind of general questions, of course, I will be stopping and taking breaks to answer those questions. So a reminder that our Talent Experience Platform, our TXP, is a combination of all of the three Totara products. That's Totara Learn, Totara Engage, our learner experience platform for social learning and collaboration, and Totara Perform, our performance management system. So when I'm talking about multi-tenancy across the TXP, this is all three products. So what I'll be doing today is talking about multi-tenancy at that sort of high level and what it is and how it works, and then I'll be doing a deeper dive into how the three products are affected by multi-tenancy, or how it applies across them. So in Totara 13, which we released at the end of last year, we released some functionality that we've called enhanced multi-tenancy. Now, the reason we're calling it that is because across version 12 and earlier, there was the ability to create a multi-tenanted environment. And by that, I mean separate users and provide them a different experience as they go through. whether that be filtered reporting or different navigation or different dashboards. So that was achieved through things like audiences, where we could change different featured links and the main menu. We could bulk enroll users using the audiences functionality, and limit or provide visibility to different courses, programs, and certifications using audiences. Further to that, we had the positions, or we still do, we have the positional and organizational hierarchy, which allow you to group users together and to apply in bulk things like competencies and goals, but also use those to filter reporting. And of course, we have the roles and permissions and access rights functionality that Totara has. What we have pushed in 13 is building a more building upon that existing functionality to sort of formalize and more technically separate those groups of users into nominated tenants. So we have tenant groups or tenants. Within those tenants, we have a range of new administrative rights. There's a new permissions context, which I'll go into in further detail. There is tenant-specific content and tenant-specific branding as well as part of this next release of multi-tenancy. So multi-tenancy sits at the core level of the Totara Talent Experience Platform, which means functionality like we have with users and reporting and audiences and authentication, etc. It's available across all three products. It doesn't belong to Learn or Perform or Engage. It's whether you're using one of those products, two or three of them, and for the full TXP suite, you'll have this multi-tenancy functionality available. Of course, the application of those is different depending on which combination of products you use. So when I say I will go through multi-tenancy at a high level across the whole TXP and then go into Learn, Engage and Perform, and to note that there are two settings within enhanced multi-tenancy. There's the standard functionality and then there is isolation mode. And so as I go through, I'll talk primarily about the standard mode and then mention what happens if you turn on isolation mode. Alrighty, I'm going to flick over to my demo site now. While I'm doing that, Matt, is there anything in chat that I need to know about?
No, everyone is listening very carefully so far.
How do you know?
I know.
Alrighty. So this is my local demo site. It was upgraded overnight to 13.4. So we're going to go on this adventure together, demoing on a brand new platform. I have obviously tested it to some extent, but there could be a new setting in there that I'm not expecting. So let us together go down this rabbit hole. So first off, I'm logged in as an administrator, and the multi-tenancy functionality is, once it's switched on at the site level, is available here within this core platform under tenants. So we have the ability to create any number of tenants within your Totara site. Here I've got two examples, organization A and organization B. And you'll note that this dashboard, this managed tenant area, is in fact a report builder report. So you can change the information that's displayed here to some extent as you see fit. When we go to create a new tenant, we can give it a name, and note that that name doesn't actually have to be unique. I'd recommend that you do make it unique, but we appreciate that sometimes organizations have, there are changes. So it doesn't really matter that your name is duplicated, but what you do need is a unique tenant identifier. And there's certain parameters of what characters are limited or required within the tenant ID. So just look at that contextual help if you can't quite remember. There's an optional description, and whenever you created a tenant, you will automatically have created for you a tenant specific category to house all of the courses, programs and certifications related to that tenant, a audience for all of the tenants, and a dashboard for the tenants. And notice that you have the option of giving those a specific name. And when it comes to the dashboard, you can base it off any number of other dashboards that you have already set up in your site. You can also edit a tenant after the fact to some extent. So if here's organization A all set up with people in it, I can go through and I can always rename the category or change the name of the audience, or suspend the audience, which essentially archives it and prevents users from logging in if they're part of that tenant.
And Meredith, a quick question, just because it's quite an important one for everyone. Got a question, what is a tenant exactly?
Well, a tenant could be lots of different things. So it's a kind of a walled group of individuals. And I've got some links to the help documentation that Matt might be able to drum up. It's the scenarios for multi-tenancy. So there's lots of different ways that you can use tenants to support your site. So you can have everything from having a very large organization that you want to kind of chunk up into different tenants or groups so that they can manage their own users. And I'll talk about that in a minute. It could be a site that is for a very large organization that maybe has lots of smaller groups. And you want to be able to divide their content up for those groups, but also have a shared environment. It could also be a way to group your internal users from your external users, so support for that extended enterprise model. So a tenant isn't exactly one thing. It could be used in a couple of different ways. So I would very broadly and generally define it as simply a collection of users within a particular context called a tenant. I think as I go through, this will become like you'll be able to answer that question yourself as I'm going through, or at least fit it into your model as I describe it going down the line. Are we good to continue, Matt? Is there anything else in there?
Yeah, thanks, mate. I think that was just quite an important one for me.
Yeah, wild assumptions.
People might get a bit lost at the start.
Yeah, fair enough.
Go.
Thank you for that question, whoever asked that. So you'll see here on screen, we've got a couple of mystery columns, which I'm going to talk through. So we have this idea of a tenant context, and I'm going to describe that in a little bit more detail. And this would be as complicated as it gets, and I'll do that on the next slide. I just want to talk through some broadly how the different roles or administrative rights that can be applied to a tenant. And this might help answer that broader question of what is a tenant. So we've created this group, I'm calling it Organization A, and we can have user managers associated with this tenant or group of users. And a user manager is someone who can administer, so add, edit, and suspend accounts within that specific tenant. And you can have any number of those. You can see we've got Thomas and Tracy here are user managers for Organization A. And we also have domain managers. And domain managers are people that have administrative rights, again, only within that tenant, and they can do things like add and edit users, but they can create courses within their tenant category, and they can do things like manage audiences within their tenants. And that, in fact, that audiences management has been updated very recently across 13.3. Now, we also have this idea of tenant members and tenant participants. So a tenant member is someone that is typically in a learner role. So it's someone who's associated with one and only one organization or tenant. Now, we also have tenant participants, and tenant participants can be associated with more than one tenant. And that would be probably applied where you have people like subject matter experts or trainers or facilitators that might be interacting with courses and users within those courses across multiple tenants. Again, it depends on the kind of application of your multi-tenancy that you're using. It could be that you only have tenant members. Now, to illustrate the point in terms of what is a tenant member versus a tenant participant, I find the best way is actually just on the simple screen here, which is editing the tenant association for a particular user. So Tommy was set as Organization A, but you'll note that if he's not a tenant member, if he doesn't have one of these two selected, he's selected no, then he can be selected as one or associated with one or many organizations. If I say that he is a tenant member of organization A, that tenant participant area selection box is removed. And that's what we want here, is that Tommy is a tenant member of organization A. So he's restricted, and all of his information is restricted to that particular tenant. Okay, so we have tenant members, tenant participants, user managers, and domain managers. And I'm now going to see if this works. There we go. On this page here, I want to talk a little bit about what I mean by this tenants and tenant context. So when we create users on the site and associate them or link them to tenants, so say they can be tenant members or tenant participants, and either of those types of users can then be promoted to be a user, a manager, or a domain manager. To get those users on the site, we can create those users manually. And I say we, so a site administrator or a user manager or domain manager for a tenant. We can also upload those users. So there is on the participants page ability to upload a user via CSV. And we can also at the site level create users and associate them with tenants, either as a member or a participant using HR import. There is a field or a field, input field in the user source for HR import. So what I mean by context is, and this, like I say, this is going to be the most complex thing I cover. So strap in and then it's downhill from here. With the access rights, the roles and permissions framework that we have across Totara, we have people that might be site admins, so they're an admin at the site context. We have trainers and courses who are associated, like a trainer that's given that right at the course context. Things like managers. Managers are given manager access at the user context. So there's a hierarchical context of how permissions are applied. And access rights or roles are created by a combination of permissions and capabilities. So capability might be upload tenant user, and a permission might be allow or prevent. So it's a complex matrix of lots of granular different permissions or capabilities. Whether you can do something or not makes up your access rights. So I'm sure you all know this already. What you can then do is say where these permissions can be applied. And previously there was site level, program, category, course, block, activity, user. So there were 7 different contexts at which you could apply access rights and also override them. Now, there is a really good diagram and description within one of the Academy courses, which makes this a little bit clearer because this is kind of complex and super technical. So that Matt might be kind enough to post that into the chat. There is now this new context called tenant context. So it's a new context or holder or area for applying access rights. So the user manager role for tenants is that user manager access right applied at the tenant context. Now, what this means is that there's a whole new permissions framework around tenants. There's a range of new capabilities around tenants. And then what that means is that these are just the defaults that the product ships with. You can make changes. So if you want user managers to do a little bit more than they would by default, you can change those permissions within that tenant context. So it's not going to give them access rights at the site level. It will still restrict them to a particular tenant. So you can add and adjust and change those permissions as you need. Likewise, you can create your own permissions within a particular tenant. So if you've got a group of users, or if you're a Totara partner listening in and you've got a particular customer that has a variety of needs, you can create maybe even a custom role, which you apply at the tenant, which might be a course manager or something like that. So again, crazy complicated, but very, very powerful. For those that are using roles and permissions at a deep level, this might be super interesting. For those that are not, they probably just want me to move on to onto the next screen. So I'm going to push on. So we've got users in the site. What can tenant, so we've got created the tenants, and users in the site, we've applied them access rights. What does that mean at the site level? How does that change their interactions? So there's two ways that we can change the look and feel of the site, other than the dashboard that we've assigned to them. There is a tenant themes interface. So you can tweak the theme using going straight into the UI, and I'll show you in a minute. And brand new in 13.3, there is now the ability to have a login image and a specific login page for tenants. So let's take a look what that looks like. So while I'm navigating here, is there anything in the Q&A or chat, Matt?
Yeah, lots of questions coming in.
I confused everyone with the role stuff. I'm sorry.
Here's a good one. Can audiences be used to add tenants, add users to tenants?
No. So there is a reason for that, because you can belong to multiple audiences. So you could have some conflicts and permissions. What happens is when you create a tenant, a user is automatically added to a tenant specific audience. And that audience is kind of a hybrid of a set and a dynamic audience. It's set insofar as you can't change who is a member of it manually or by changing the rule sets. The system says if you're a tenant member, you are part of this tenant audience. It's dynamic insofar as if someone changes tenancy or is removed from the system, that audience is updated dynamically. Having said that, people like domain managers can create dynamic audiences within their subset of tenant users. So you can kind of still use audiences, but you can't add people to a tenant using audiences at this stage.
Okay, I think you're going to answer some of these other questions. So should we carry on and then we'll come back?
Yeah, let's carry on. Okay, so within, when you turn on tenant branding, you then have an option to separately change the look and feel of the interface for each of the tenants that you have created. So if I go into edit here, you'll see that I can add a different logo. So in this case, I've got the Totara Engage logo. I can also then make different color changes. And I'm towards the end of the session, I'm hoping to log in as Tommy, as we saw before, of organisation A, and Sam of organisation B, and see what that experience is from an end user. And I've picked bright, kind of fairly contrasting colours. Apologies for anyone who is colorblind or color impaired. That probably won't be such a meaningful example for you, but I've picked blue for organisation A, and I think red for organisation B. So you can change the colours, and you can also add, and this is new, as I said, you can also optionally change the default login image for each tenant, and you can also add a custom footer in the theme. So there are some limitations, but you can be pretty creative across your branding. So if I go back into organisation B, and you can see that I've got Totara Perform as a logo, and my color is this delightful red palette that I have picked here. I haven't uploaded any custom imagery at this stage, so that's not going to be part of the demo, simply because this is new functionality that I haven't had a good play with yet. I don't want anything to go wrong when I'm on a webinar. It's sort of don't work with animals, children's, or brand new functionality that you haven't played with yet. So there is that tenant login and theme. So you can have quite a different experience combining this rebranding per tenant with the custom dashboards, and of course using the main menu item here to change the items, and any audience-based visibility. You can have an audience of tenant members. You just can't assign tenant by audience, which means you can use things like the visibility functionality in the featured links block to provide different look and feel and different navigation for tenant members. Okay, I want to just jump back very quickly back to that tenant overview page and just point out that here, the tenant login page, there is a specific URL, which is just based on the tenant ID here. Now, because this is brand new functionality, by default, the report, if you've upgraded your site, won't have this new tenant login page column in this report. So you just need to go and edit that report and add it in there if you would like, if you need that specific URL to share with users, or if you want to test it yourself. Just a trick. Okay, so let's now move on to multi-tenancy specifically within Totara Learn and how it is applied across the application. So we have, if you turn on multi-tenancy, and this is standard multi-tenancy versus isolation mode, you can have shared courses, programs, and certifications, and those are learning items that have been created in a category other than a tenant category, whether that's a top level category or another category. And that means that you can have a shared environment for users. They can all be working in the same course. Of course, that means there's no, by default, no separation of users and user information within those courses. If they are posting in the forums, they can see the names of the people posting in the forums. You can, of course, use roles and permissions to restrict the display of that information so that you can see that an individual has commented, but not who they are or any other further details if you so wish. But the idea is it is a shared course. There will be scenarios where people do have shared as well as separate tenant courses. Now, because when we create a tenant, a specific tenant category is created, you can also then have subcategories within that main tenant categories, and that's where all of those courses, programs, and certifications sit. And you can have then tenant-only courses, programs, and certifications. So only if you're a member or a participant in that tenant can you see those learning items. If you have turned on isolation mode, and oops, I stopped sharing. That was the wrong button to, no, I haven't. I turned off my PowerPoint, that's what I pressed. There we go. I wanted to do that instead. Isolation mode is a piece of functionality that currently sits within experimental. And the reason for that is what it does is completely separate tenants and create a wall around each tenant. So you can't have those shared courses, programs, and certifications, and there are no shared site level resources. Now it sits in experimental because multi-tenancy and all the different use cases and all the different roles and permissions is very complex. And also everyone uses things in different ways. So we've done, extensive testing, but sometimes it's anyone's guess how some people apply these things. So when you do turn it on, be aware that you'll need to do your own testing if you've got a particularly unusual or highly configured setup. But you can enable tenant isolation if you so wish. I'm just turning it off now. By default, it's off, but you can turn it on to create a very separate environment. So that means that within the course catalog, you will see that there are a range of courses that are shared, as well as courses that are specific to particular organizations. And you'll notice when I go through and log in as Tommy or Sam, that they will only see the corresponding courses here in this catalog. Because I'm an administrator, I see all of them, but I wanted to illustrate that they are here, as well as a variety of shared courses and certifications and programs. Right. So that's primarily how it's impacted across Learn. I would say at a site level, if you turn isolation on, then users in all the functionality that sits at the site level, like dashboards, they'll only hit their audience dashboard. They won't go to the home page, and any maybe site pages or site level resources and activities that you've created will no longer be available. It will be tenant specific navigation and tenant specific content only if isolation mode is on. I am going to move to engage. So are there any specific questions relating to multi-tenancy across Learn, Matt?
Yeah, so a good question here. Can I use several dashboards within a tenant, let's say for subgroups for different departments?
Yes, you can. In fact, that's in my tips and tricks slide, a couple of down, so spoiler alert. Yeah, absolutely. There's no issue with that. You can have more than one dashboard for tenants, and you can use audiences. to assign them as well.
And just a quick question on that isolation mode. If you have internal and external tenants, is there a way to isolate, for example, perform from the external tenants?
No, not through the isolation mode. You would do that through permissions and the roles and access rights. So you would remove all of that navigation from external people, and you would certainly remove the ability to comment and to add on to anything. Like they could, fudge the URL and find the goals page if they so wish. But you can prevent them from doing that using the access rights. So yes, you can, but it's unrelated to multi-tenancy and isolation mode.
So one very last one, cheeky one. Is it possible to add tenant-specific custom CSS for the theme?
No, not at this stage. Unless you put that in directly in the footer. At this stage, it's the colors, the login page image, and the footer that you can change. Yeah.
Thanks, Meredith.
That's good. Great questions, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Matt. Alrighty, so Totara Engage and multi-tenancy. So multi-tenancy and Totara Engage, this is a complicated but interesting relationship. And the reason is that Totara Engage itself is designed for users to share content and for you to be able to create site-wide resources that anyone can access. So if you have multi-tenancy enabled, you can still have these site-level resources and workspaces, and they could be available for tenant members and tenant participants across the site. But a note that if someone makes a comment on one of those site level resources, and these resources are created by non-tenanted users. So this would be site admins or tenant participants or someone not associated with a tenant. They can create these site level resources. So if you have a member of tenant A and tenant B looking at these shared resources or a shared open workspace, comments that other tenant members have made are visible, but their details aren't. So their user cards, that user profile summary card is not. So they can see that there is a comment and read it and rate it, but they can't see who that's from. Tenant members can still create resources and build workspaces. If they build resources, being resources or surveys, they can only be shared and are only accessible by other tenant members. So even if they share it, they use the share option to share with everyone, it will only be visible to fellow tenant members. And if they choose to try and share it with specific people, the list of available names will only be other tenant members. Likewise, if they create tenant workspaces, only other tenant members can join that, whether that be a public or a private workspace. And I'll show you again what this looks like a little bit more once we log in as actual tenant members. If isolation mode is on, much like with Learn, cross-tenant sharing and workspaces are prohibited. So you can't create these site level resources in workspace, even if you are a site administrator. Will only be tenant specific areas and content. And the same rules apply when a member changes tenant. So content is still available, but profile information will apply. So Totara Perform, this is a little different. So you can still have site level performance activities. So an administrator or someone with access rights to create performance activities can create site level performance activities, and tenants can participate in those and still not have any interaction with other tenants. You can obviously assign performance activities to an audience, and that could be an audience, the tenant audience. But the restriction at the site level is if you are allowed to say who you want to receive feedback from in a feedback activity, the list of available users for a tenant member are only fellow tenant members. So a tenant can only select their own tenant pairs. If you want to create tenant specific performance activities, so performance activities which are only visible and available to tenant members, then you will need to assign either your user manager or more likely your domain manager an access right of performance activity creator. That's not available by default, but it is merely a matter of assigning that access rights. And you'll see that here on my demo site, Sandy has this performance activity creator, right? And you can add that super quickly just by clicking on this little plus button and providing her with whatever access rights can be assigned within the tenant context. There's that context again. So performance activity creator means that Sandy can log in and she can create new performance activities, and they'll be specific to, in this case, organization B, and visible only to organization B. When she creates those activities, she will automatically be able to manage her own, any activity that she's created. But if you want Sandy to be able to manage other performance activities created by other performance activity creators, so if maybe there was another site domain manager added that also had performance activity creator rights, then you could assign her an additional access right, which is the performance activity manager. So performance activity creator allows you to create performance activities and manage the activities you've created, and performance activity manager allows you to manage your own and other people's performance activities within your tenant. Right. So I would like to log in as an actual tenant now to kind of show you what that looks like. But while I'm doing that, are there any questions?
Lots of questions.
Oh, no. I regret asking. Okay.
A couple. So when migrating from 12 to 13, I would like the existing categories to move to the appropriate tenant. Is that possible?
Well, if you, I mean, yes, but you'll just need to, oh, hang on. You'll have to manually move that category to sit within the new tenant category. So those tenant categories won't exist in the new site. If you add your tenants and create those categories, then you can just use the course category area. So, and here you can move all of the content and move them to the new category. So you can say, I want everything in vocational skills to move and go to organization A. So it won't be automatic because it won't have that association, but moving it will be super quick.
Thanks, Meredith. Do you want maybe one or two more?
Yep, sure.
Can you apply different themes to different tenants? So, for example, the custom CSS could be added in those theme settings.
Yeah, I mean, there's no custom CSS field for that. You can, yeah, you can do, if you want a very custom theme, so you want beyond what you can do within the configuration. What you can do is install that theme as you would have install your other themes, have multiple themes, and then you would need to apply it to all of the tenant users. So you notice that when you go to your profile area that you've got in the edit profile area, you have a theme option if you've got user themes enabled. Doesn't seem like I have, and then you could select it. So you could have very custom themes, but you need to make sure that you assign that theme to the right user. The difficulty is that you do have things like tenant participants and changes, so that doing anything too custom through the UI can create problems, but you can achieve that by having multiple themes installed on your site and then assigned per user rather than per tenant.
Okay, thanks, Meredith. I'll let you carry on because I know you've got more to do. So.
Okay. Right, so I'm going to, this might answer some of the questions. So I'm going to log in as Tommy. Tommy here is part of organization A, as we've seen. I'm just going to do a login as. So you'll notice first off, there's that lovely blue that I warned you about and the Totara Engage logo rather than the Totara logo. Excuse me. And Tommy is taken to the organization A dashboard. So this is the tenant dashboard. Again, I've made sure that it's going to be quite different from the organization B. We've got a different layout, different content. And of course, you can use the things like the featured links block or the HTML block to add some content that is specific to that tenant. When I go and log in to find learning here as Tommy, you'll see that I don't have those Organisation B courses listed here in the catalogue. I only have my organisation courses as well as those shared courses. If I go into my library and create a resource, when I create an example, next, if I try to share with limited people, I only have other people within my tenant, and you'll see what I've done here is there are only people at the site level and within my tenant here. So there's a small list. There's 1,000 users on the site, so you can see it's quite restricted. And if I share with everyone, it doesn't actually share with everyone. Okay, go on. Oh, there we go. I was wondering why my done button was different color. So there's my Organisation A content, even though it's shared with everyone, and you can see here that globe means it's shared with everyone. Likewise, if I go into workspaces, I have a Tenant A workspace, which I am the owner of. And this is the only workspace that I see if I go into find workspaces other than other shared ones. There is you'll see in a moment when I log into SAM, there is a Tenant B workspace, which I don't have available on this list here. If I go into my performance activities, I have all of my shared activities over here. I don't have any, and so here I've created a performance activity for Organisation B, which you don't see in this list here. Right, let's all say goodbye to Tommy. Bye, Tommy. And let's now welcome to the stage Sam. Different Sam, Sam Taylor. Sam. There's Sam Gibb. I'm gonna log in as Sam. And now we see this rather garish orangey red number that I've selected here. We have a different logo, we have a different color scheme, a slightly different dashboard. So before we had a single image at the top, now we have our current learning displayed as tiles along the top here, a different image and no content in the section here, everything down on the left and right. If I go into my catalog, you will see that I don't have my Organisation A course. I now have my Organisation B course, as well as my shared courses. Going to my library, I can see that I had a Tenant B member resource, which wasn't available. Again, if I create some content and share with everyone, clicking things in the wrong order, I can't share with anyone outside of my tenants. So there's list of shared users, and there's my Tenant B resource. And again, if I go to workspaces and find there's my Tenant A workspace is no longer available. I now see the Tenant B workspace, which I can then join, even though it's a public space, as Tommy in Tenant A could not see that workspace. If I go to my activities, I now see that Tenant B performance activity there that Tommy, as part of Organisation A, did not see. So there are lots of different use cases. So I've got logins for Organisation A participant, Organisation B participant, and an Organisation A and B participant. I'm looking at the time and thinking we won't go through that today. However, those are the kind of testing accounts and setups that I would recommend if you want to have a bit of a play with an enhanced multi-tenancy across your site. So on my tips and tricks slide, it shouldn't be a surprise to some of the things, just to remind you that you can have multiple dashboards, and those can be assigned by audience, and you can create an audience which has multiple roles. One of the roles that we have for audiences is a tenant member, of X enrollment, sorry. We have an audience role for tenant membership. There we go, that's a much better sentence. And you can then create dynamic audiences. So you can say part of Organisation A and a first aider. You know, you can create these stacked audiences. And with these, you can create multiple dashboards and assign them by those audiences. And note that if you are using multiple dashboards, a reminder to use the dashboard block at that so that people can jump between those multiple dashboards. A reminder around isolation mode, if you turn it on, it is experimental, so do check against your particular workflow and use cases. And a reminder that it limits all site-wide functionality. So if you do have a page maybe sitting at the site level, which is a contact us page, a reminder that that won't be available if you turn on isolation mode. Do encourage you to play around with that tenant context. These are just the defaults that we've created. You can go in and play around with those as you so need, so you can tweak those capabilities and permissions. I mentioned you can have tenant audiences, and there are lots of different use cases and options. So the help documentation really is helpful. It's got a couple of 4 different scenarios that you can use, but of course there's also various extended enterprise models as well that you can employ. So at the start of the session, Matt posted in the chat a link to the Totara Academy. There is a fantastic course on multi-tenancy which talks you through all of this and how it works. The help documentation is brilliant. There's more resources and help that you can get on the Totara community. If there is a question, go in there and do ask it. A variety of website resources. There's a feature sheet on extended enterprise, and of course these recordings and other demos are up on our YouTube channel as well. So Matt, I can see a few questions still. Anything that you think I can feasibly answer in a few minutes?
Yeah, this is quite a good one. So is there a new field for tenants in the HR upload user fields?
There is, yeah. So there is. So there's 2 new tick boxes in the in the user source. So what that looks like is this. Drill in. So either in the CSV or external database at the bottom here, we've got tenant member or tenant participant here, and that's using that unique identifier that we saw before. So this is just a reminder that it's the ID number. So yeah, you can in bulk upload users. So the HR import's available to site administrators, and the user upload functionality is available to tenant users, so your user managers and your domain managers. And they can access that just by going to their user list, but a shortcut for administrators is clicking on the list of participants, and there's that upload users, but it's also sitting here within the administration.
Thanks, Meredith, that's great. So when adding a new user, does it have to be in a tenant? If yes, can a tenant be set as a default?
No, they don't have to be set in a tenant. You could have people that sit outside a tenant. So yeah, so if no, full stop, yeah.
Okay, is it possible to limit reports so that it only shows information of persons within the tenant that the viewer of the report is part of?
That is an excellent question. So there is a filter for tenancy, and there are limited reports at this stage that are available to user managers and domain managers because of bleeding of information. So if I go into the user source and into the content here, you can usually filter by tenant. I've picked a bad one. Oh no, so you can use based on visibility rules. And of course, you can also filter them by audience and use the tenant audience as well. Perhaps that was a bad example. I think there's things like all the course completion reports are filterable by tenant. Let's have a look. I got a nice course report. Let's have a look. That's not what I wanted. But yeah, there are is the short answer. Course completion by organization. I think this one has the tenant filter. No. Well, yeah, there we go. So there are various reports which have one of these filters, which is by tenant. There are a limited set at this point, which is why we've employed content controls over the user rights user manager and domain manager. And the reports that are filterable by tenants are particularly around course completion, program completion, certification completion, and related to the kind of things that individual members would complete or interact with within the site as a tenanted individual. I'm just struggling to find a report source which displays it right now, but yes, you can. And of course, you can always then default by audience as well.
Great, thanks, Meredith. I was just typing an answer for someone else. Is it possible to move a person from one tenant to another?
Yep, it's just, yeah, they do. And note, if you do things like that, if they had previously created, say, engage content, then those rules apply. So if you go from tenant A to tenant B, then your content will then only be available to tenant B, and any previous comments from someone from tenant A, the comments are visible, but who said it and the user details are not visible. Yeah, it's just add replace. There's no big thing as long as they're expecting it.
Okay, do you have time for one or two more?
Yep. We'll just do one more and then we'll call it a day, and I'll go through the rest and post them in the forums.
Thanks, Meredith. Okay, so can you easily change a user from system to tenant A or from tenant A to tenant B without losing records?
Well, I'm not sure what records you're referring to. If things like course completion are stored against the user rather than the tenant, so that shouldn't be an issue. So the only thing you might, no, I can't really think of any records that you might lose. Note that things like performance activities, anything you previously completed would be archived, and you wouldn't be able to complete it after, like if you're partway through a performance activity, you wouldn't be able to complete it. But otherwise, I don't believe that you would really lose anything. You would just lose access to things.
Great, thanks a lot, Meredith, and thank you for all your time spent teaching us about multi-tenancy today.
You're very welcome. Thank you everyone for joining. Apologies to those I didn't get to. It is a complicated subject, so I was anticipating I wouldn't be able to help all of you with questions, but as I say, we'll go through and provide some clarifications in the forum, so stand by. So thank you so much, Matt, for being the Matt Chat with the most, and thank you everyone for joining. I do appreciate your time. And for anyone who is working at the NHS or with the NHS or for the NHS and any other essential services, thank you so much for all of your hard work and efforts. Right, well, this is it for today. See you next time at a currently unscheduled time for another webinar. If you've got any ideas for another session that you'd like me to run, please do post in the chat.
Thanks, everyone. We do have a session on February the 3rd at 4 o'clock about tenant management, so do come along to that one. And yet, do have a look at that Multitenancy Academy course. There's lots of information in there.
Yeah, absolutely agree. All right, well, thank you so much for listening and enjoy the rest of your days.